What's up guys? Welcome back to another tutorial. This one is in real time. We're going to be painting a lovely lady sitting poolside. So let's jump in. For all my watercolor journal videos lately, I've been using my Paul Rubens watercolor journal. This one is lovely. It's 100% cotton cold pressed watercolor paper. And I've been using my Artex washi tape to create a nice border all around the edge. My paint colors today are Holbein turquoise blue, Holbein yellow ochre, Daniel Smith ultramarine blue, Daniel Smith indigo, Holbein alizarin crimson, and Daniel Smith burnt sienna. These are actually all colors I use very frequently. They're wonderful for earth tones, skin tones, fur and feathers, all kinds of things. My brush today is a silver black velvet size 8 round brush, and I might also be using the smaller size 4 round brush for some of the details. You'll need a pencil, a water jar, and some paper towel for blotting. All right, to start out, let's do the sketch. We can start by locating where the rim of the pool is going to go, and it's about 1/3 of the way down in the reference photo. So you don't really need a ruler for this. You can just approximate a straight line coming across. And then in the center of the composition, we're going to put the straw hat. You can just draw a rough circle for now. And then instead of diving into details with those fingers and details like the elbow, just look at the general shape of the arm. You're seeing a really wide V shape coming across. So try to just get that overall feel of the pose before worrying about details. So once you've got a rough shape in, then you can start refining and polishing and getting everything about the right size and shape. There's this big red bow wrapped around her hat that I want to make sure and get in because it adds this beautiful pop of red to the painting. And it doesn't have to be perfect. So there's the rough shape. Let's go back in and kind of tighten everything up. I'm going to start with the hat. It dips in a little here just around the shoulder, and then comes down. And then we've got the bow coming in front of it, which cuts in front of the pool side. And so as I become more confident with my drawing, I can go in with darker markings, constantly glancing back and forth between my reference photo and my drawing. And there's a little center tie at the bow. With circles, it can be tricky to get a really good circle shape. Just do your best. It doesn't have to be perfect. And the hat is not a perfect circle. It kind of bows in and out because it's a floppy straw hat. So just try to capture the essence of that. And then once you're happy with your drawing, you can erase any extra lines or markings. We don't want those to show up underneath the paint. And then her body comes down like this. Try not to make her arms too skinny. It's just a straight line for the back of the arm. And then it comes up to a straight line curving upward slightly at an angle where it meets the hand. And for the fingers, just draw a glove shape first. So the thumb and the overall shape of the hand. Don't draw those detailed little finger separations yet. In fact, if you choose, you don't even have to include all those details of the fingers with your painting. If it's too intimidating, you can always simplify that. Do try to make the arms the same width and have an eraser on hand in case you don't like any of your markings. So once again, I'm drawing the hand as the shape of a glove almost. Let's actually get the top part of the arm here first. And a little thumb extending. The middle finger is going to be the longest part of the hand. There's your little glove shape. And then a little divot in the elbow. And then go ahead and redraw the side of the pool. And if you'd like to use a ruler to complete the shape, to complete the line so that it's a perfect straight line, you can certainly do that. All right, so you can see she looks fairly cartoony, nothing too realistic about this yet. We can add the middle line separating the two fingers, 2 and 2, separating the fingers in half. Draw lightly for these fingers, and then from there you can divide more evenly the rest of the fingers. So the middle line separating the middle of the hand and then the other fingers. There's a little separation from this pinky finger from the rest of the hand. All right, guys, we're ready to dive in with paint. We're going to keep it really simple. So let's actually start with the water in the background. Now in the reference photo, we see just the bottom of the pool, kind of this mosaic feature. We're going to way simplify that. We're just going to use our turquoise blue and ultramarine blue and maybe a little of the indigo and just create splotches of water. So it's going to look a little bit more artsy than the reference photo. And that's a good thing, right? So start with clean water on your brush. And if your paints have dried out because they've been on your palette for a while, like mine have, go ahead and spray them with water to activate them. So take your clean water and swirl it all around in the background. You're going to need to be careful to paint around your little figure, around the hat, and around the poolside. So be able to glance at your paper from an angle so that you can see where it's wet and where it's dry. We're essentially coloring in with water all of the pool water. Definitely avoid the skin on the arm. We don't want to get any blue in there. And already you'll notice the water sinking into your paper. Just go ahead and add a little bit more because it's going to dry faster than you think it will if you live in a dry climate like I do anyway. Scrub the water into your paper and scoop out any puddles that might happen. And then go ahead and start with one of your blues. It doesn't really matter which one you start with. And just start to drop it in all over the place. And then switch to your other blue. In this case, I'm switching to turquoise blue and do the same thing. And you can watch it just explode on the paper and it looks so, so cool. If you want to leave little gaps between some of your brush strokes so that it almost looks like white reflected ripples on the water, you can certainly do that. If you want the water to be a little darker in the corners to create almost this vignette, drop in extra color in the corners and then be a little more careful as you approach your edges and your pencil marks leading up to the figure. So you can see I'm painting a lot more slowly around her arms and around the hat. And then I'll just go ahead and paint right underneath her arm the rest of that blue. While the paper is still wet, you can push and pull the paint and manipulate the color a little bit. If there are any shapes you are unhappy with, you can always drop in more color. While it's wet, it's a great opportunity to just play with your shapes. As it begins to dry, you'll start to approach almost this danger zone where it's a little less workable for you, and you run into the danger of lifting your paint right off the paper. So do be careful about that. But for now, we're still at a stage where it's really workable. Just don't introduce any extra water with your brush, otherwise it will push aside the paint and create blossoms. I'm going to take a tiny bit of indigo and just boost the vignette in the corner. Definitely do this while the paper's still wet. And if you don't like how dark that is, you can always scrub it back out and go back in with a brighter color, but I like how that looks. All right, so avoid the temptation to mess with it too much. So once you're happy with your colors and your shapes, leave that alone and let it dry completely. The next thing we'll paint is the poolside. It's just going to be a really neutral gray. So to create that, we'll take a tiny bit of indigo and a tiny bit of burnt sienna. And you can see it produces this really lovely neutral gray. And we'll just use that to scrape across the surface here of the poolside, right up to your borders, painting more carefully around the arms and the hand, of course. Now, to help the body feel like a three-dimensional thing and to help it feel like there's some weight to it, we're going to need to create a cast shadow underneath the arms and the back against the pool so that it looks like there's a physical presence there. So once you've loosely painted in your gray, you can dip into your indigo again and your burnt sienna again, this time producing more of a warm, darker colored gray. And just paint that along the edge of the arm and along the back. We're painting a shadow underneath the body. I'm going to rinse that out and then just swipe along that edge to soften it a little bit. And already you can see she's standing out more in her environment just because of that little shadow we put down. If the water is dry enough, you can go in and start painting the skin. Let's actually start with the hat. I'm going to switch out my water. For the hat, we're going to use that yellow ochre. Swirl a little bit of water into it to dilute it somewhat. We don't want it super pure pigment. And then just drop that in all over the hat. I accidentally painted over the ribbon. That's okay. We're painting this wet on dry just to help us control where it goes a little easier. So just being careful to fill it in completely. A little bit of water if your paint isn't flowing easily for you. Just dip in the water without removing all the paint from your brush. And then you can rinse that and then grab some burnt sienna and add a shadow on the back side of the hat. I made that a little dark, so I'm removing the paint and then softening along that edge, removing some more with the water, blotting on the paper towel to remove any excess water, and then just softening. You can see suddenly the hat looks much more round. And then with your burnt sienna, just a little hint of it, a tint of it on your brush. Not too much water. You can begin to drop in the circle shapes of the straw hat. Little suggestions are all you need, and make sure that it's very light on your brush. Just a ever so slightly tinted wash on your brush. And then using that burnt sienna again, paint the rest of the shadow on the hat. There's one on this side, and then a little bit of a shadow underneath the bow. And we're just suggesting the straw in the hat. You don't have to paint all those tiny little details, especially when you're working tiny like this in a journal. But just a little suggestion of it is all you need. Then the next thing is going to be the ribbon on the hat. So let's use our permanent alizarin crimson for that. When you water it down, you get a beautiful pink. So we'll start with a little bit of water mixed in so that it's not pure red. But you can pretty much color in the whole ribbon. You can see why it's necessary to switch to a smaller brush for these details, just to help you stay within your lines. And then color in the ribbon wrapping around the hat. It gets a little skinnier towards the top as it's turning behind the shape of the head. I've rinsed that out. And now to darken areas within the shadows of the ribbon, I'm grabbing a tiny bit of indigo on my brush and just darkening some of those creases where the ribbon is tying here in the center, where it folds over itself and in between, like that. Just reaffirming the drawing and adding those dark marks to give it some spatial depth. If you want to add the polka dots, you can. Using the indigo, you'll need something almost black for those. And I'm just placing them, trying to keep them evenly separated so that it looks like a pattern. Rinse that out. And then if you wish, we're going to see how this goes. I'm going to try to lift a little bit of that alizarin crimson from the ribbon to indicate a little bit of a shine in the fabric. At the top where the light is hitting it. Yes, and I think that helps. And then I'm going to add a couple little circles inside the top of the hat, again to suggest the straw in the hat, the pattern, the weave. All right, so the very last thing is to create the skin tones on our figure. So to do that, let's clean out our mixing space so we don't end up with muddy colors here. And then start with burnt sienna, very light tinted wash. Make sure that it's very watered down because what we're going to do is paint that directly onto the dry paper on the skin, and this is going to represent your lightest value in the skin. So make sure that it's very light. Let's just do one arm at a time for simplicity. When you're painting skin, you want soft edges because skin is so smooth, and the transitions from light to dark can be very subtle. So while that light tinted wash of burnt sienna is still wet, take a darker mixture of burnt sienna and gently paint that along the bottom of the arm to create that shadow. Because the paper is still wet from our tinted wash, it should soften naturally. What we're painting now is the shadow, the skin tone shadow on the back side of the arm, and it's very dark here in the complete shadow on the back. So look at your reference photo to see how dark you need to go. You can see it's quite dark along that shadow edge. Now we need to mix in a little bit of pink. I definitely see some pink in her skin tone, so I'm taking some alizarin crimson, still quite watered down here, and then swiping along the edge next to the burnt sienna, helping her look a little more tan in the sun. And we'll use that color on her hand as well. And you can use a little more pink on the tips of the fingers. This will really help it appear lifelike. That pink in those vital areas like the fingertips, cheeks, ears, it really does give it that vitality that is needed in a figure and a person. So we can come back and paint between the fingers a little more specifically in a second. For now, let's use just a tiny bit more burnt sienna to darken her back one more time. One more layer. And we can take that color on the other side as well. It's up to you if you want to do the light or the dark first. This all needs to be dark, so I'm just filling that in. And then take your tinted wash of burnt sienna, the one we started with on the other arm, and paint the other arm quickly. Think of this as preparation for your wet and wet, for applying more colors over the top that will soften out naturally, just like it did in the water. You do not need to reserve any of the white of the paper for this skin. Then take your pure burnt sienna and drop that in the shadow side of the arm. And watch it soften. If you see more yellow in the skin tone, you can use your yellow ochre. If you see more red, use your alizarin crimson. Another alternative to that is quinacridone rose. So I'm taking a teeny bit of my alizarin crimson, swiping along that edge where the shadow meets the light, and then painting the fingertips with a little more red. You can see in the reference photo the fingertips are quite dark and pinkish in color. And we can come back and do that with the other hand now that it's dry enough. Really trying to paint more on the underside of the finger where it's turning towards the shadow. You do want it to still appear like there's a light source coming from above. It's tricky when it's this tiny. Grabbing a tiny bit of burnt sienna, watered down, and then painting little suggestions of knuckles. And coming back to the right arm, you might find you need to go back and forth between the two as different stages of drying happen. The colors change as it begins to dry, it lightens, right? So you might need to go back in and darken again. That's what I'm doing here. With another layer of burnt sienna. And then we'll paint in that elbow crease. You can also use ultramarine. Might sound strange, but you can use that to really darken an area with the burnt sienna. When the two colors are combined, it creates almost a black. And if your ratio is a little more heavy on burnt sienna, it creates a beautiful chocolatey brown, which is great for those shadow tones in skin. This is a combo I use all the time for skin tones, for pets. And so there, we've darkened that skin. And now we can darken the shadow under the arm one more time. Just a delicate sweeping brush stroke. And then the last thing is to boost your shadow under the figure one more time. I'm just using a tint of burnt sienna just right there underneath the figure's back. So let that dry completely before you remove the tape, but that was so much fun. Yeah, there we go. So there's the finished painting. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Hit that like button if you found it helpful, and check out these other watercolor journal videos. Thanks for watching.